Never in my life have I landed a backflip. Now, I want you to just imagine this. I walk up to the stage, I stand here, I brace myself, I take a deep breath, I jump straight up, tuck my knees, and land a backflip on my first try. Just really imagine that. But now I want you to imagine a separate scenario. Imagine a trained gymnast walking up to the stage and doing a couple backflips. Now, I want you to answer this question. Which scenario would you find more impressive? Me doing a backflip or a trained gymnast? I'd bet money that my hypothetical backflip would drop a lot more jaws. Simply because I also bet that everyone here recognizes the difference between practice and natural ability. It's amazing seeing someone's hard work and expert technique, but sometimes it's just a lot more entertaining to watch someone who seems like they were just born with it, like they backflipped out of the womb. These are the people that we want to be. But why? Well, this can be explained by something called the naturalness bias, or what I think is a more fitting name, the appeal to nature fallacy, where we tend to like things that haven't been tampered with, things that are perceived as effortless. We tell people to buy products with all natural ingredients, even though it really doesn't make that much of a difference a lot of the time. We say things like, gosh, look at all this new technology and ideas. I say we need to go back to the old days and do the things that nature intended us to do. You know, like die quickly. And lastly, we say to ourselves, you know, I just wasn't born to do this. This just wasn't meant for me. This is how we evaluate ourselves and other people. We don't want to put in the effort, and we end up judging others who do, calling them tryhards and wannabes for not wanting to give up. In one study done by an associate professor, when participants were shown the business profile and business plan of a new entrepreneur, participants that were shown the version that described the person as a natural talent rated the business plan higher than those who were given the other version that described a hard worker. So it's almost as if the fact that a person works hard implies that they weren't capable in the first place. And this, everyone, is where we find ourselves today, where people don't find it worth it to try. Success seems impossible, and failure seems too possible. Now, if I'm going to really break down this obstacle, I thought what better way to do that than to debunk something that many people label as impossible. Thankfully, when I was 9 years old, I went to a toy store and picked up this. A Rubik's Cube. Classic 1970s puzzle that you probably have sitting in your home right now. Well, I knew that I wanted to solve it, so as soon as I got home, I directed myself to the YouTube search bar, as one does, and after a few hours of trial and error, I solved it for the first time. 9-year-old me was elated, and this quickly became my absolute obsession. Here's a quick picture for reference. This is me passing time while my parents shopped. And as you can tell, I brought this absolutely everywhere. And it was basically like an infinite boredom fix, because each time that I would mix it up, I would have to solve it in a slightly different way. So I had to teach myself to identify different patterns so I could figure out how the pieces moved. For a puzzle that seemed so intimidating, the possibilities were pretty much unlimited. And learning how to solve this puzzle taught me a valuable lesson in closing the gap between what is deemed possible and what is deemed impossible. So let's go back to what I said earlier, that success seems impossible without natural talent, that is. This is exactly how this puzzle has gained its iconic status, from people preaching about how impossible it is to solve. But this whole intimidating reputation is unfortunately just a marketing tactic. It's not that the majority of people are completely unable to solve it, but just that they haven't learned how to solve it. The thing is, the skill that you need is already built into your cognitive function, and it's a very powerful thing called muscle memory. It's what allows us to perform movements without conscious effort, like a reflex. So think about how you learned to write your name or tie your shoes. When you were a child, you had to consciously think about these things, about which direction the shoelace is supposed to go, or how to keep your pen steady to write each individual letter. But through practice and repetition, these things became engraved into your memory, because that's how your brain works. This is exactly like solving a 3x3 cube. Let me give you an example. Earlier, I talked about recognizing patterns on the cube. So let me show you this specific pattern that you can get, where everything else is solved, but the top face looks something like this. And I'll replicate it on this one as well, for those who can see. This is what it looks like. So whenever I see this pattern, I know exactly what to do to get the cube into its solved state. That is muscle memory in action. Of course, these new movements felt foreign the first few tries, but after just a bit of practice, it hardened into a reflex. Take Max Park, a world record cuber on the spectrum who actually struggled with fine motor skills before getting into the hobby. He famously said, "Don't think, just solve." Because once your brain gets used to these movements, you won't need to think. Just like how you don't need to think about writing your name. And once I began to really familiarize myself with this concept, I realized that it can be applied to learning just about anything. Riding a bike, driving a car, playing an instrument, doing a backflip. The list goes on. The skills that you need to learn these things can all be simplified into the one skill of muscle memory and letting your brain get used to these specific movements. So if you see someone else solving a cube or doing anything you think is impressive for whatever reason, and you say to yourself, "Wow, I could never do that," there's not much of a difference between you and a child who doesn't know how to tie their own shoes and thinks that they never will. To clarify, I'm not calling you a child, but I'm saying that you're underestimating your own brain. I'm saying don't assume that something is impossible, but make room for yourself to make it possible. Now, let's talk about another misconception. Most people think about solving a 3x3 side by side, or color by color, where actually one of the more popular and efficient methods of solving it uses a layer by layer technique. Much more practical. You start with the bottom and work your way up to the top. Now, the last layer gets a bit tricky, and so this is where people like to memorize algorithms. Simply, an algorithm is a sequence of moves that brings about a desired result. The goal is to be able to quickly recognize a specific pattern based on colors and shapes, and be able to execute the algorithm and letting your muscle memory take care of that. So what I showed earlier was one algorithm for that specific pattern. And the cool thing is, they really aren't that hard to learn. If you play around with the cube enough, you'll actually notice that every single algorithm has the same exact formula: break and restore. So let's bring back the case from earlier. And I have a more 3D model up on the screen so you can really see what's happening. The first step, as I said, is to break the order, or move pieces out of their correct spots. 1, 2, 3. Now, at this point, the cube looks something like this. It actually looks less solved than before, because I had to break pieces out of where they were supposed to be. But the next step is to put the pieces back. Not in the same way that I took them out, or else I'd be back at square one. But what I need to do is put them back in a different way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Undoing the damage and solving the algorithm. Now, as we saw on the cube, in order to create progress, I had to destroy it first. And this, to me, is just another way that this puzzle teaches us about capability and how it speaks to people who are holding back and holding themselves back because failure seems too possible. So now, if you find yourself in this mindset I want you to just think about the pattern that I showed you how to solve just now. Think about how I broke what was stable and then redirected it to find something better. Because if you want any chance at growth and improvement, you need to be familiar with doing these things. It's about doing these things that are uncomfortable and things that may feel unnatural. And this can be applied to learning new skills and hobbies, but also just learning how to live life in general. So for this last segment, I want to talk about what a shared interest in breaking expectations has led people to do. Throughout the years, the Rubik's Cube has actually accumulated a 40-year history of records and competitions as a product of people coming together and asking the same question. What else is possible? What else are we capable of? And surprisingly enough, we actually seem to be progressing faster than what is possible. And I'll give you just one example. So one way that records are counted is through averages of 5, which is the average time of 5 consecutive solves. The current world record average of 5 is 3.9 seconds. But what is so remarkable about it is not just its speed, but how it relates to the averages that came before it. See, in November of 2013, Felix Zemdegs, a cuber from Australia, set the world record average at 6.54 seconds, which is also the first 6-second average. This means that all recorded averages before this were longer than 7 seconds. After this, it took around 3.5 years to go below 6 seconds by the same person. 5 long years after that, Timon Kolosinski from Poland broke 5 seconds. So you might be thinking at this point, wow, that's a long time for just a 1-second difference. And you'd be correct. Because these times are already so unbelievably fast, it's hard to improve because they're already at such a high level. So that's why each second decrease is such a big deal. And as we continue to get faster and faster, it's going to take longer and longer to break the next barrier. Or so we thought. Of course, that was before we remembered the existence of one crucial superpower: 11-year-old Asian children. To everyone's surprise, Yiheng Wang from China got a 3.91 second average in May of this year, breaking the 4-second barrier 2 years and 10 months after the previous barrier. This means that it took a faster amount of time to break 4 seconds than it took to break 5, 6, and 7. Which is contradictory on so many levels. But this is the beauty of passion and determination. At some point, we will reach a limit where the very last 3x3 world record will be set. But we are more than happy to approach that limit and to close the gap between possible and impossible. And that is exactly the mindset that I am hoping to promote today. To not get caught up in what you can't do, but to do the best with what you can. And with that, I urge you all to never be afraid to try, but to be terrified of standing still. Because the difference between those who achieve and those who do not is not a matter of capability, but a matter of willpower.